I was finding ingredients in everyday products that seem to have health effects. Claims like natural, non toxic, clean does not mean anything. If we can limit our exposure simply by choosing to buy another product that works just as good, why would we not make the safer choice?
Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. Excited to chat with you. There's a lot I want to dig into on this non-tox or low-tox living but just to start, can you share a little bit about how you first got interested in this topic? What made you look into it and feel, hey, this is something important that deserves my attention?
So, what got me started was when I was pregnant with my twins in 2014. I had a high risk pregnancy. It's a really rare type of twins. And from the get go, I was just put on alert, I would say. And I spent the majority of my pregnancy on bed rest, which of course gave me a lot of time to think. And I think, like most parents or expecting parents, I was just considering everything in my environment that I wanted to be safe for the babies, right? And one of the pieces of that was looking at the products that I was using every day and just making sure that they were safe for baby. But when I just started to scratch the surface, I was finding ingredients in baby products and in everyday products that seemed to have health effects, even though they were made for babies. And so it really sent the alarm off in my head that maybe the products that I'm using aren't quite safe. And I dug a little deeper and I looked into the laws and regulations around this and learned that there really is not a lot of regulation of our everyday products. And it's really kind of up to us to figure out what's safe and what's not. And I went down the rabbit hole of learning what all of these ingredients mean. Are there studies showing they're harmful that are in these products? I started tracking this information. And it's one of those things where once you start to learn, you can't stop thinking about it because it's a little bit shocking in the beginning. It's disheartening to realize that products on the shelves might not be safe. I think a lot of people, and myself included, assume that if it's being sold to us, that it has been tested for safety and that it's safe to use. And that's just not the case. Anyone can make a product and put it on the shelf. There's few regulations, but for the most part, products really don't have to go through a rigorous safety assessment. So that's really what got me on this train, and I have not turned back.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, do you have any sort of technical background, or was it just the drive as a mother to be, like you're motivated, and then, as you say, you start to go down the rabbit hole. One door leads to another, and does it just continued all those years from that?
I do not have a background in investigation or anything like that, or in toxicology. It really is just this drive and curiosity. It's just something that blew my mind. Like, I'll give this example: baby powder. I know that it was in our house growing up, and lots of people use baby powder. And I find out that there's asbestos contaminated talc in the baby powder. And so it's just these shocking revelations, dangers of products really just got me hyper focused on this. And I'm just passionate about products. I've always been really interested in products, I would say. I like cosmetics, and I just am very interested in products. So it was really that curiosity and wanting to do the best that I could. And then also having that feeling like there's not a good resource for me out there to tell me what to do. I was shocked that I couldn't go to a website and it would give me a list or tell me what's safe and what's not. I just had to piece this together. And so that's another part that really kept me going, was I wanted to be able to help other people. It was wild to me that this information was so difficult to find. I mean, you can find articles about all this stuff, but to really get down to the research, like what is true, it takes a lot of time and felt like it needed to be done.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and I really think that's the most important factor in evaluating this stuff. Like, as I went through my own health issues and start to look into this stuff, it is totally shocking, like how many common everyday things that there can be, toxins in. And where this really hit home for me is I started after, the 10th doctor or whatever it was getting these different lab tests back showing the amount of chemicals and toxins. And for me, that was one key piece of my health journey. And it's really tricky because this stuff you don't, for the most part, you don't see it. And for the most part, you don't smell it or taste it, and you just don't know it's around. So it's a slow creep, this accumulation. But because of, all the fast manufacturing and, new methods, like every day there's more and more toxins in our environment. So I find it's just like a big dichotomy where it's a bigger and bigger issue, but because it's, silent, unseen, a little harder to quantify, it's harder to appreciate. So that curiosity, I find those are the people, me personally, that I've found the most value from and come to trust the most, because it's not even about all the technical knowledge. It's like, who's going to think deeply and say, okay, how does this apply to our health? How does this add up over time? So I love that. It's just, we're very lucky to have people like you that do that, because there's probably two times in my life where I felt like I needed an advanced degree to just get by. One of them was when I lived in Washington, D.C. right after college. And I felt like I needed a master's degree to read the parking signs. I would read like all three parking signs on the light pole and then come out to a ticket like every
I know that
couple
feeling.
months.
That's so funny. I've
Yeah.
experienced that too. When I moved to Houston, the traffic and the traffic signs and all that was totally different. I'm from Louisiana. It was a lot different.
It is. It's like, okay, this time I'm sure.
And it's a good point about this long-term thing that you mentioned, or the unseen. I'm sorry. A lot of people will tell me, but I've been using this on my skin and I don't have a skin reaction. I don't have a problem. With toxins, it's not necessarily that your body's going to tell you immediately. It's the accumulation and the consistency of exposure over time that leads to these honestly bigger, worse problems to deal with, long-term health
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. And so this is one thing I really wanted to ask you, right? Because even when it comes to studies, like there's limitations. And like in the EMF world, people who are really knowledgeable about that's one of their big pet peeves is like cell phones against the head. The way they're studied, it's totally unlike the real world. It's like, okay, the phone was against the person's head for 30 seconds and there was no effect. So these are completely safe, and no effect whatsoever is going to be had on health. And there's a huge gray area that just skipped over there. And I feel it can be a similar thing with toxins, because obviously the companies producing the chemicals and the companies using them, they're financially incentivized to find that they're harmless, right? And that's why we have this
Right.
ridiculous list of how many thousands of chemicals and toxins are produced each year and approved and allowed even by the EPA. So when you're looking at that, have you come across that? Do you see limitations in the studies where you're like, okay, yeah, nice study, but we've totally missed the how this would be applicable to people's real lives day after day?
Yeah. So that's a great point. A lot of people will say that we're using this ingredient at this percentage of the formula and therefore it's safe. So they're saying that the dose makes the poison. And I have an issue with this because we're exposed from so many different products. I think I saw this statistic that the average woman puts 168 chemicals on her body per day. And I believe it because if you look at the full ingredient list on a product, it can be 50 ingredients, right? And so this idea that if this one product just has a small percentage, it just does not, just is completely doesn't make sense. It doesn't include all the other exposures that we have. And then another important point of studies in this industry, I think, is who they're funded by. So whenever I'm doing research, the first thing I do is go directly to the bottom, because there's so many studies out there that are funded by companies in the personal care industry, in the cosmetics industry. And so you have to think, is this objective, subjective? And so I think that the source is also important to look at with the studies. And then to take it a step further with this, this percentage not being poisonous, especially when it comes to things that we can control. So you're getting some of this ingredient in one product, you might be getting another, but there are alternatives without it. And if we can limit our exposure simply by choosing to buy another product that works just as good, why would we not make the safer choice? And so I think that argument doesn't have isn't very solid.
Okay. And so how do you think about that? How do you weigh all these things? Are you more focused on what you just said, just focusing on, hey, what's a clean product that does the job, and then there's less to worry about? And that sounds like at the beginning of your work there wasn't nearly the choice in products we have now. So maybe earlier it was, really parsing through the ingredients. But how do you weigh all that? The fact that there may be lacking studies, even if there are studies, there's some considerations like you mentioned, the funding and how the study was actually done, and how do you put all that together to make your practical decisions for you and your family now?
Yeah. So I will say that since I started, which was really digging into this in 2014, so much has changed because I would look for a particular product and there really, in many cases, would not be an option. And just to kind of give you the way that things were back then, there was not clean was not a thing. There were some green brands, but there definitely was not a replacement for every category. So I really had to dig and test and try to find things that were just better. Maybe not perfect, but better. And I think that now there is pretty much a switch, a clean alternative for all of our conventional products because the clean movement, I guess, whatever you want to call it, the trend has really exploded and companies really want to get on that bandwagon, which that's a whole other issue I could talk about is the greenwashing,
Yeah, we
companies
will.
misrepresenting that. But in terms of, for me, it's number one is not using products that have ingredients that we know are questionable, right? So I identify as many ingredients as I can that have had research done on them that are toxic, and I try to avoid those and recommend avoiding those. And then there are instances where, and I would say this is typical, that natural ingredients are better than synthetic, mostly because they've been used for longer. This is what people used before we came out with the science came out with, and labs are able to make these ingredients from petrochemicals that weren't done previously. A lot of the ingredients in, for example, all natural perfumes come from pieces of essential oils that are put together. And these essential oils have been used for thousands of years. Of course, essential oils are very powerful. And that's, again, another conversation. But I think in general, natural is better when you can choose it if it gets to that point where you have 100% natural and one is synthetic and both don't have known toxins, I would lean towards the natural. I guess if that answers your question.
Yeah, and it leads to another question. We'll just go into the greenwashing idea right now. So if it says natural, can that be trusted? And what are the main things you look out for?
Yeah. So unfortunately, claims like natural, non toxic, clean don't have any legal definition. So really does not mean anything. Honestly, the only one that has some weight is the USDA organic symbol. And a lot of personal care products and skincare products are not going to have this. There are some, but they have to meet some criteria to be able to get that logo on their products. And then, of course, we have to make sure that they're not faking it. But that we're going to assume that whoever has that logo really, really is approved. So those labels just don't mean a lot. And especially, it's kind of like if listeners look at food labels and they see natural flavors and they know that that might not be natural. Maybe some people know that, maybe some people don't, but it's very similar in products with fragrance. It can say natural fragrance, but it's made up of many, many, many chemicals. It's not necessarily natural. It just says natural.
If
So
it if it if it's on the label, the ingredient is natural fragrance, that can be the case.
yes. So fragrance is an ingredient loophole. Companies don't have to disclose the ingredients that actually make up the fragrance. It could be 100 chemicals, and then they just put fragrance on the label. And the reason, well, that's problematic because it's not transparent, but it's especially bad because studies have shown that these fragrances contain harmful ingredients, particularly phthalates, which is what makes the fragrance last. And phthalates are endocrine disruptors. there's actually there's been a lot of studies done around phthalates and their harm on reproduction and lowering sperm counts and all kinds of uh, scary things. So we don't want that in our fragrances and in our products.
Yeah. And that's such an important point. I think people are starting to get it, but even still, it's a little bit hard for people to connect. It's just like, well, what do you mean? I'm smelling something, and maybe it even smells good to some people. And yet, I mean, what you just said and is true is some of these chemicals can disrupt your hormones. And that's a huge health problem across the population. So many people are on hormone replacement or have way out of whack hormones. And this is one piece of the puzzle. Yeah, and that's the tricky thing with health is there's many pieces that all add up. So I think in the past, sometimes the argument's made, well, oh, this is just a little piece, it doesn't matter. But if you times it by 100, it does. We can't just say 100 times it doesn't matter. And honestly, with these the personal care products, and to your point, if someone's using 168 different chemicals a day, like that's not little. Like that will add up. So, but for anyone listening who's kind of on board with the idea, but they still aren't fully connecting in their head, like, yeah, I have a hard time really believing that all my favorite products, that the stuff my parents used and grandparents used might be causing detrimental health effects. How is there anything that ever like really hit that point home for you that really sticks out, or maybe if you are explaining this to your audience that helps people wrap their mind around this idea?
For some people, it's actually reading the studies. And that's like a big thing that I do is share the actual research because I think when you read it and you understand, and I think also hearing from people, getting feedback from people that go from using fragrance products to not, how much better they feel. That's one of those things I talked about in the beginning, how a lot of this you can't tell a difference, right? You're not experiencing a skin reaction. But when people remove fragrance from their home and in their products, it's like the whole new world opens up. I get that comment all the time. I don't have headaches anymore. My head feels clearer. And then when they do smell it, it's so strong because we're so used to we have fragrance all around us. I mean, babies are born, all the baby products are fragrance, and that we're just constantly inundated with fragrances that we don't realize how bad it really is until you step away. And so I think just taking that step back, and then there's been some. I also mentioned in the beginning the baby powder issue. There's been people that there's ovarian cancer is linked to use of baby powder. There have been some instances that have come out in the news that sort of point to these problems manifesting in people from using products. There's someone I know that was diagnosed with cancer and had every single genetic testing done, had no link to any kind of genetic predisposition to cancer, but had cancer at a young age. And when they tested her hormones, they were all out of whack. And when she stopped using hormone disruptors, all that came back in line. And so I think there are personal situations like this that you hear and you think, wow, this stuff is really impacting us.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a pretty stark example. In that particular example, was there a handful of products that were being the hormone disruptors, or was this just like a total house and
I
beauty
think
cabinet
that
clean
it,
out?
it was a total house and cabinet cleanup, but this person was very healthy, like ate in terms of eating, like ate a whole real food diet, not a lot of processed food, exercise, kind of checked all those boxes. But the missing piece seemed to be the products. That was the one thing that hadn't really been dug into. And this was 10 years ago. And that person has gone on to now spread the word as well, which is amazing, and share her story. So it's a success.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. So, so you mentioned earlier that like some of these products on the shelves might actually not be safe. And that's another thing that's just hard to wrap your mind around. It's like, I think we have a lot of inherent trust, and that needs to be, we need to take another look at that because we're finding that's not the case. And so what else did you find when you started looking into this? You mentioned earlier too that there's not a lot of regulation or not as much regulation as we would think for these products that we're consuming. We're rubbing all over our bodies and inhaling the scents and different things. What
Yeah.
did you find when you looked into that?
So the interesting thing is the the FDA really does not have much power to force companies to do anything or so they might make recommendations about what's safe, but they can't force companies to follow the rules. And like this is just I have two small examples, but one is the FDA has said that the only proven effective uh, and safe sunscreen ingredients are titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. They've made that statement. That's out there. But if you go to buy sunscreen, 9 out of 10, I'm making that number up, but most of them are not going to be made with only zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. They're going to have a slew of all of these other what are called chemical sunscreens that disrupt the endocrine system. So it doesn't jive. And then another example would be aluminum. There's been a lot of research done around aluminum and it's linked to neurological disorders. But if you turn over the back of a deodorant or an antiperspirant, almost every single one's going to have aluminum in it. So there's a disconnect, right, between the information that's given to us and that we know could be harmful and then what's actually going into the products that are on the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds wild. So just companies can produce whatever they want, and if we're unknowingly buying it, then they can just keep doing it because it's not the food.
Yeah. And so I really think it's up to us. And there was a legislation done a few years ago. It's called the MOCRA legislation. It was the first one done and since something like 80 years to like cosmetics regulations. And it was exciting to see things move. But in my opinion, the changes were so incremental. And it just drives home the point that it's really up to us to make the better choices. And hopefully, if enough of us are making the better choices, then the companies will then offer better choices to everybody. And I just always think about that. Every time you make a purchase that's a little bit better, you're doing a little part towards moving to that safer place.
I totally agree. I mean, basically, if we're waiting for legislation, we're waiting on the slowest moving piece, and it's never going to be to the level that if you want to be healthy, it's never going to be to that level. It's more often going to be the bare minimum and affected by lobbying and these large corporations that really invest a lot of resources into it. But we could speed that process up overnight just by making different purchasing decisions. I mean, we don't need a lot of
Absolutely.
change. If overnight we just stop buying that product, they will change. I'm a big fan
Absolutely.
too. And speaking of the greenwashing, I think another thing I learned over time that there's a lot of fear mongering and even in like non-toxic community where people have great intentions, like a lot of people go to this fear and panic and, oh no, don't get this. And I think that has detrimental effects that come from the best of intentions, but we need to be aware of that. But one of the ways greenwashing and companies have taken advantage is they just figure out the one thing, like what's the buzzword, take that ingredient out, but they'll swap it with something that sometimes can be even worse. It's just not as well understood, and people don't flag it, which is why your blog and your app and all the information you put out is so important because not everyone can keep up with this stuff all the time. But so my point is, I much more prefer to know here's what I do want. Like on the positive side, this is what's good for me. I do this with food, but I also do it with personal care products versus, what don't I want? Because pretty much the companies are pretty good now about slapping that no, PFAs or whatever. And then there's 10 other new chemicals
I
inside
like
it.
that you point out PFAs because that's like the best example. When I first started looking at PFAs in 2014, that was like one of my first blog posts. I realized that PFAs were in the Teflon pans. So like, don't use pans with I think it was the pans were advertised as PFOA, which is just one PFA, but there's thousands. So they'll say no
Yes.
PFOA, and then um, it's just that's just a really good example. It's really any chemical that has a fluorine precursor probably has the same harms as any of the known PFAs that are out there. And something I wanted to talk about, you mentioned the fear mongering. I think it's like really important that people don't feel like it has to be done perfectly or not done at all. Like better is better, and you should do little things at a time. Um, I think people say, "Oh, you're doing it all wrong. You're using that," and um, I like to encourage people just to make small changes along the way so that it's not as overwhelming. And there is a lot of fear mongering, but what we're trying to say is just illuminate the truth, because a lot of it's just hidden. People want to know and they want to do better, but they just don't have access to the information. So just to shine a light on it, and then people can digest it, think about it, and maybe make a better choice the next time they go to buy that product.
Yes, I like it. I like that a lot because yeah, the fear monger. I mean, fear is a toxic, emotion to be constantly coursing through your body. We're not meant to be in fear and anxiety and panic all the time. So that has its own effects. But I really like that you said, accessing the information and really it comes down to making a good decision. Because if somebody can make a good decision for themselves each time they make a purchase, then they'll get there. Like you're gonna be in a good place, But if you make a panic, fear based decision, like, oh no, this is bad, let me throw this out and buy this, and then a year later, oh no, this is bad, and replace it. Just this constant cycle. So
You're
let's
right.
talk.
Fear is worse. Fear is like could be more toxic than the ingredients. It's important you said that. And
Yeah,
to consciously make the choice, like you said, to make a good decision is actually empowering, and it spills into other areas of your life. I have found you're more intentional about what you're purchasing, you're more intentional about what you're consuming in other areas.
right. Yeah, no, you definitely. I agree. The confidence builds. So as far as going into the information, especially if people don't have. So this goes back to what I said earlier. The second time in life I felt like I needed an advanced degree was reading the ingredient lists of personal care products. Like once I started to get into this, like I was like, all right, I'm motivated. I'm not gonna buy that stuff anymore. And then read the back, and it's words that use every letter in the alphabet and have 15 syllables. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And so I would just default to, if it has more than 6 syllables, no. But I don't even think that's fully accurate. Like it seems like some of the more trusted brands now will will use elements that are longer names, but they have a more natural basis. Or maybe you can speak to that. I don't know if that's greenwashing, but they kind of put the use purpose
That
in
can be
parentheses after
helpful.
each ingredient.
I think
Is
that
that
can be
accurate, or
helpful.
do they kind of bend the rules there?
Sometimes it's accurate and it can be helpful sometimes. Sometimes it is misleading because there may be an ingredient that I will say is flag it and say it's potentially harmful, but on the side it'll say derived from coconuts. Well, just even though it's always derived from coconuts, but it's still problematic, right? It has something else added to it that makes it harmful. So part of it's from coconuts, which is fine. And then the other part that you pointed out was that if it has more than 6 syllables or if it's a word you've never seen, even a very simple ingredient that's natural could have another word that's used for it that's long and confusing. So really, I mean, we don't know it. Most people do not know what those words mean. It's like reading a foreign language to them. And so you really have to understand and spend time learning what those ingredients to be able to look at the label for yourself and determine if it's safe or not. So that has took me a long time, and I just really tracked all of that research as I was learning about ingredients. I kept track of it, and that is ultimately the data that has gone into my app that assesses ingredient labels for people so that they don't have to learn all of that. And I constantly add new studies to it. I link to the studies. So if an ingredient is in there that gets flagged on a product, you can read why I flagged it and then click over to the research as to why it's potentially harmful. It's super important that these are linked to studies, the exact studies, and that people can learn more if they want to. Many people, like you said, don't have the time and don't want to sit there and learn every single ingredient. So it's quick. It'll show you does it have something that's toxic? Does it not? But if you do want to learn more, and I think it can be powerful to learn more, and especially when you're trying to help others, you can read and understand why, and then make that decision. Okay, this is something I really should skip, or I'm not that worried about this at this very moment. There's other products that are more important to me to switch. And so that will be next on my list.
Okay, very cool. So people can, when they're using your app, they can drill down and go
Yes,
further depending how far they want to take it.
exactly. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. And then how does it work on the surface level? Are they typing in the ingredient or scanning the list or product somehow?
So you can scan the individual product itself in the store, or if you're shopping online, you can take a screenshot with your phone, or if you're looking at your computer screen, to screenshot the actual ingredient list, and it's scan it in the app, and the app will pull up any toxins, and then you can tap on each one, and it'll give you the description, and then below the description are links to the research as to why it was flagged. There's also a search feature. So if you were curious about one ingredient that you heard was toxic, you could look up that ingredient in the database and it would explain why that one is toxic.
Nice. Do you have any recommendations or strategies for people if they know they need a new product? Like, all right, I'm all out of cleaning solution or something, or hand soap, and they know the old one's probably not ideal. So like, I need to start somewhere fresh. Um, do you point people to brands, or does the app make recommendations, or where can people start if they know they want to have less toxins in there, but don't have a favorite brand yet or aren't familiar where to go?
So I do have a shop of products that I've tried that I like that are not don't have any toxins in them, or products that have been recommended to me that I've scanned them and made sure they don't have toxins. So if you need a suggestion, you can search, like if you need hand wash, you need hand soap, you can type in hand soap and get some options. I'm not, it's not like a sponsorship situation or a partnership. It's completely unbiased. The app is, in terms of when you scan a product, the app only considers the ingredients. It does not consider the brand or anything like that. There are affiliate links though for the recommended products. And that you can find on my Instagram page or my website. I have all those products linked, and it's also linked in my app just to make it convenient for people.
Yeah, because it's a real balancing act, and then for people to not get overwhelmed at the beginning, sometimes they do just need to find a trusted source, whether it's you or anyone else. But finding someone who they're like, all right, we're on the same page health wise, and then
Yeah,
having some recommendations to start, because it's doing something's better than getting overwhelmed and not doing anything.
I totally get that. Some people just need an option, and they want to know that it's going to work for the most part, and just tell me what to buy. There are definitely people that are in that mind frame, and I get it. We're busy.
Well, I heard you say something interesting on another podcast you were on, which is that companies frequently change the formulas, which surprised me a little bit. I thought they kind of land on it and it's tried and true. So that's just a whole another element that kind of made me think a little bit more about, like, okay, well, there's stuff I haven't checked in a long time that I've kind of just become comfortable with. And I think with something like that, then it's super helpful to have resources like yours or anything else out there just to help people stay on top of things.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's if I wouldn't say it's frequent, but it does happen. I think people aren't aware, especially because it happens and the packaging doesn't change and they don't make an announcement. Companies will just do it, and it does happen sometimes when they get purchased by larger companies and they're trying to cut cost. So they swap out an ingredient for a cheaper option, and you wouldn't know. And I also encourage people to scan every time you purchase for that reason, just to make sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how your app or information is different from EWG, if you're willing to? Not to put you on the spot, but that's kind of the big one that I think people start with. And I used to love, I'll be honest, used to appreciate EWG because that was my first experience with someone or something that really collected a lot of data and I could look into it. Now I get a little frustrated with it because I can definitely see some of the business side behind it, and both in terms of just like 20 pop-ups on their website, but then also just it's some of the products I'll look up and I know are good, they're not even listed. And then some of the products that are highlighted, it seems like there's some kind of relationship there just based on what's shown. So I've myself have been starting to look for other places. I still use it, but it's not like the end all be all, and it has some limitations. So it makes me curious how yours compares with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too, EWG was a place that I started, and I think that they do a lot of different things, and some things are very helpful. Um, in terms of the product scanner, though, and the product recommendations, EWG is for consumers and businesses, and my app is just for the consumer. So there's no side to this where I'm working with brands. It's completely, which is just a different way of coming at this. And they also use a rating scale. And there can be approved products that have one ingredient and products that have a worse rating that do have that ingredient. So I think it can get murky with the verified products. Um, they have certain brands and products that they have the EWG verification on, and we just don't know that all the ingredients meet all the standards, I would say. And then it was really important to me to include that research because EWG does give a rating, but we can't really drill down to the research level. And I think it just gives you a better understanding of the toxins. You need to know why it's getting flagged. So those are a few differences, I would say. My app will just tell you what toxins, it doesn't rate them. And so I think that also can be confusing for a lot of us. If it's a 6, is it bad? If it's a 2, but then this 2 rated product has an ingredient that's rated an 8 in this other product, and I think it just needs to be, I wanted mine to be binary. Like it either has toxins or it doesn't. Because at the end of the day, we're exposed to so much. And if we can avoid it, then why not?
Okay, nice. I didn't realize yours did that because one reason people like the ratings is because it's easy, right? They can look at it. But to your point and everything we're discussing if you're not somewhat informed, then you're open to greenwashing or any type of sales and marketing that gets you to buy things, and it's really a shame to find things out 10, 20 years down the road when your health collapses and you find out toxins may have been a piece of that puzzle. So it's certainly nicer to find out earlier. So that rating can be, you could just blindly pick it. But I didn't know yours was binary like that. So it pretty much just says, hey, there's flagged as toxins or studies showing that.
Right. There's no 1 to 10 rating for an ingredient or red or green or yellow or anything like that. It either has these toxins or it doesn't. It'll give you a green check mark if there's none in there.
Okay, nice. And when you're looking at studies, what do you look for? Like, what's a good study to you that's reliable and useful, and like, okay, you can take something away from that conclusion, and do you have any examples of studies when you like throw it out or like, yeah, this isn't something I'm going to use to influence the ratings in the app?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big one is the funding and the conflicts of interest. It has to be a study that's not funded by the industry and that there's no conflicts of interest because there's so much of that out there. Like you'd be surprised how much of the studies are swayed, and these companies have the money to spend. These large corporations have money to spend on this type of research to try to make their product look safe. Unfortunately, that happens for sure.
Yeah. Are there any studies you would love to see that haven't been done yet?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I would say there's a lot of ingredients that are newer that are being used in fragrances, and they're synthetic. And I think because they're new, a lot of them haven't gone through like rigorous testing, so we just don't know if they're um, if they're actually safe. So a little bit of background on the fragrance industry is it's always been secretive. They don't have to disclose the ingredients, and this is fragrance. Let me back up. They don't have to disclose ingredients in fragrance across the board, no matter what the type of product. But I'm talking specifically about like perfumes and colognes. And so kind of the first wave of clean perfumes and colognes were these what they called safe synthetics. And so brands knew that consumers were on to the fact that they weren't disclosing ingredients. So they said, okay, we're going to disclose everything and we're only going to use safe synthetics. So they list tons of ingredients and they don't have the major red flags that we look for in fragrance. Like the phthalates, for example. So they don't have those red flag ingredients, but they do have all these synthetics that I'm not sure that I feel comfortable that those are 100% safe. And I have in the past, I recommended those when those were the only options available. In the last couple years, I've seen some amazing brands come out with 100% natural perfumes. And so I've sort of switched my stance on that. And I've told people like, this is what I'm recommending now. But I think that's one category that could really be dug into. And I'd like to see.
Yeah, it's classic. That's what they're so good at. Just,
Yeah.
oh, we took this one out and slid these other three in, and don't
Yeah.
mind those.
Right. I know.
So if somebody's wanting to get started or to make the next step forward for them in reducing their toxic exposure, you talked earlier about not getting overwhelmed, that people can take it slowly. What does that look like, or what do you see people have success with, or a good either starting point or next step for wherever they're at?
Sure. I like to call this switch out as you run out. And I think that the majority of people might get overwhelmed. There's few people that can just throw everything away and start fresh. I think most of us, like, we have to kind of ease into this. So if you're about to run out of a product, then you can start looking around. What are the options out there? What appeals to me? And switch that one out as you run out of it. It's less wasteful, honestly, and you're more likely to stick with it if you've done a little bit of looking ahead and researching and finding something that you think might work and actually asking for some feedback. Like I have happy to talk to people about product suggestions, or there's tons of other influencers and content creators and people that try products all the time, get their feedback on things. So I think really switching out one at a time can be very helpful. I also think that just avoiding fragrance products in general, I think people don't realize how many products in their home are fragrance. Trash bags. It is actually difficult for me to find trash bags that don't have fragrance added to them because it's not on the box. They don't say these have a smell, but basically everyone I pick up is fragrance. There's one brand at a local grocery store near to me. It's like the grocery store brand, and those don't have fragrance. So I always have to go to that grocery store to buy them. So trash bags have fragrance, and if you can just start moving away from fragrance, and a lot of times if it has fragrance, it might have something else in it that you want to avoid. So I think that's also a good thing to just start to step away from in terms of your cleaning products and products in your home.
Yeah, I literally just went through that with trash bags, like within
Oh,
the
you
past
did?
6 months. Got this huge box. Someone else bought it, and then I was like, "Oh, this thing just smells like a
It's
perfume factory."
Yeah, it really does. It's amazing how strong those things are.
Yeah, it was incredible. So okay, so that was gonna be my next question. What's the biggest bang for the buck? But it sounds like fragrance, anything you could smell with a strong scent is a good place to start.
I think that's a great place to start. It'll improve the air quality inside your home, which we know is like we don't get enough airflow. Inside our house can be like the air inside our house can be worse than the outdoor in terms of the number of volatile organic compounds, which is a part of fragrance, just builds up inside our home. So improve the air quality of your home. Another thing you can start to look out for is you don't need antibacterial hand soaps, body washes, cleaning products. It leads to resistance, superbugs. We're told that we need to disinfect everything, but we really don't. Actually, washing the germs away is the best course of action. Now, there is some ingredients that are in these antibacterial products that are really harmful, like triclosan, benzalkonium chloride, have adverse health effects, and they're just not needed. So I think if you could step away from those, that's also a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so that's things that are labeled antibacterial or
Right.
have those couple things you just mentioned. It's just sounds like way stronger than is needed
Yes.
for your day to day home.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if there's an instance like someone's been sick in your home or you need to disinfect a bathroom, there is there is a safer alternative now that's available. There's one that I recommend called Force of Nature, and I use it on occasion if I need to disinfect something. It can be even used on like kids' toys, things like that, if you have to. And it
Okay,
doesn't have those strong chemicals. It uses electricity and water, and it's safe. It's a good one.
nice. And is your focus primarily on these personal care products and cleaning products, or does it extend to things like, we mentioned pots and pans earlier, or you know other like furniture and utensils in the home?
So my main focus really is products. So personal care, cosmetics, cleaning products, baby and kid products. And I think just by researching these ingredients, I've learned things about other areas of the home too. I recommend certain cutting boards because they don't have the mineral oil on them and you don't want formaldehyde and things. And like the mattresses, you don't want fire resistant chemicals. I do share a little bit of that too, but I would say that the majority of my research has been into ingredients in personal care, cosmetics, like products.
Sure, sure. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, even as you say those two examples right there, that's such good examples of why I want to talk to you on this episode and just get your information spread more, because like nobody's thinking this cutting board has something toxic in it, which every time I slice into it could be released, or the mattresses, are a big one. Like there are people, that come across this information, they know it now, and they're very staunchly, I don't know what it's called, non-tox bedding or organic mattresses or clean. But if you haven't come across that, like it's not anywhere near people's radars that it could be sprayed with, a fire retardant or other chemicals that you're spending potentially, 8 hours a day, a third of your life on. So that's, the number, the most concentrated source. Like where else do you spend 8 hours cumulative, even throughout the day in our house? We're moving from room to room or office or wherever it may be. So,
It's something that you would never think about. It's not talked about. And why are these flame retardants being used? I found out when my kids were little that kids' pajamas have to have flame retardants added to them by law, or they have to be tight fitting. So almost all like polyester pajamas, and this like dates way back because there were instances where kids with billowy clothes on, and it's back when they used candles a lot at night, so they could catch fire. And so they made this law, and plus polyester is really flammable, so you have to put flame retardants in polyester kids pajamas. Up in it's an antiquated law, but people just don't know it. And so I'm always saying buy 100% organic cotton kids pajamas and make sure on the tag it says they don't have flame retardants, because there's flame retardants added to a lot of stuff, and those are very toxic to our furniture, like you were saying, the mattresses. And I think people just like really just don't know. We just are not told this information. So
exactly. I totally agree. I think that's what it is. We just don't have conversations about it enough. So it doesn't cross our mind. Like even I remember I was moving into a house one time and got a new couch, and it's sold with, I don't know, some kind of treatment, like stain resistant treatment. And on one hand, it's like, that sounds great, like not having furniture ruined. When you look into it a little more, it's like, well, those are strong chemicals that create that effect. And
right.
so if we just go with what's convenient, or where I really look at like things that get marketed and pushed hard, like we really have to be savvy consumers. If you're a savvy consumer, you can do whatever you want, but then at least you're making a choice where the outcomes and consequences. Where it's tough is people, like I said, get 10, 20 years down the road. And I went through this myself. I work with clients every day who are, shocked. Look at the toxins coming out in their urine or other places. And there's like, how did that get inside me?
Yeah. Yeah. It's in so many things. It's so many parts of our everyday life that we're unknowingly doing this. But if we know, we can make better choices. So
Yeah. Well, I will say, just listening to you and seeing some of your other work, one thing I like is you're well, I didn't hear much of you saying like, be afraid of this. You can't use that. Like you still have like products you love. And I'm a little bit more of like, all right, I'm just not going to use it unless this has 3 ingredients. Like it's a no, more cut
yeah.
and dried. But I don't wear makeup or have a lot of beauty products, so I acknowledge that. But like I've heard you say, like, yeah, I love this brand, and this swap, it's does basically the same quality, like it does the job.
It's
It just doesn't have the
amazing.
harmful ingredients. So you're still really, saying you can live your life and use products and things you need to use. Just be savvy about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's really hard for people to give up something. You can't ask people to give up everything if they don't have a better option. So I really want to encourage people to make switches where they can and where they can still feel like they're enjoying the products, because there really are a lot of options now. It's come so far. I mean, I couldn't find a clean mascara when I started. They just didn't sell it. Every single one that I tried would be running down my face. And no woman is going to want that, is going to use that. And so that just becomes, you feel like you're failing and it's discouraging. So we can like share the products that work well, make people excited about them. And it just builds. You want to use more and more. And then you find yourself prioritizing more the natural 3 ingredient. Oh, I don't need this shaving cream. I mean, I have soap and it works just as good. Things like that. You get more and more into it. It's really a journey for sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here, sharing this information. Thank you for the work you've done. I don't know if people appreciate it, but it's a lot of work to dig through all that. So it's just an amazing resource you've compiled, both the app, but also your blog before that. If people want to follow your work, hear more from you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Switchnatural.com. And I am very active on Instagram. It's switch.natural. And I am so grateful to be here, Josh, to share my story and to spread the word about switching to non-toxic products. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.